Hi friends, welcome back to another video and welcome back to another quarterly wrap-up of 2025. I would say the second quarter of this year has not been as successful with finding 5-star reads and reads that I really loved as the first quarter of the year. But with that being said, I still read some books that I really enjoyed, so let's get into them. First, we're going to be talking about the books that I read in April, and this is my stacks of books that I physically have with me that I read in April. There are 3 books that are not in this stack that I read in April. 2 of them I read on my Kindle, and 1 of them I lent to a friend. The 2 I read on my Kindle were The Maidens and Heated the Everflame, and then the one I lent to a friend is Mistborn. So we will go through these physical books first, and then I will talk about the ones that I read on my Kindle. One of the first books that I read in April was Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This has become one of my favorite classics that I have ever read. It gives 1984 but in a different font, and also it's a novella and not a full-fledged novel. I kind of wish I had known that it was a full-fledged novel going in, because I definitely had different expectations than what it actually was as far as pacing and development of the story. But nonetheless, I still really enjoyed this book. As you guys also know, I'm also just a sucker for anything dystopian, so that aspect was really fun for me. If you guys are unaware, this is about a firefighter, and in this dystopian society, the firefighters do not put out fires, but rather they start fires. They burn things that are considered illegal. Most of the time, this is books. So when someone finds a library or books at someone's house, they go to that person's house and they end up burning the entire house. And somewhere along the line, he starts to wonder why he's actually doing this, and if what they're doing is the right thing, or why these people have such convictions about still hiding these books, and in some cases even dying in the flames with their books rather than give them up or live a life without books. Then it follows his journey with that. I gave this book a 4-star, which is pretty high for a classic, at least for me. I thoroughly enjoyed this. If you have not read Fahrenheit 451, or you were just intimidated by classics in general, I think this is a great place to start. So if you haven't gotten your hands on Fahrenheit 451, I definitely suggest that you do. The next book in this stack is Metaphors We Live by, I always forget their names, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. This was my nonfiction book for the month of April, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is about metaphors in the English language and how our brains are so adapted to them that we wouldn't be able to communicate without them. This was really fascinating to me, especially the first part of the book, where it walked through some of the different metaphors that are in our language and how they're so integrated that we don't even really realize that they are metaphors anymore. The second half of this book lost me a little bit because it had a lot more to do with philosophy and a lot more theory than it did with actual practical linguistical facts. So the first half of this book I thought was absolutely amazing and so fun. The second half of the book lost me a little bit, but interesting nonetheless if you like linguistics or philosophy. I also read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. Now this one was in a vlog, so I'm not going to go into it in too much depth, but this is one of my favorite mystery thrillers that I've read so far this year, and maybe ever. When people say that this is like Knives Out, they are not exaggerating at all. It is not necessarily the same storyline as Knives Out, but it is a mystery that is laced with a ton of drama, and for that reason it made it so much fun. And the mystery itself I also really enjoyed. And the nice thing about this book was, like, she wasn't trying to creep you out in any way. She was just literally portraying the drama and portraying the situation straightforward, and I think that's one reason why that I liked it so much. I'm definitely going to be looking into some of her other books. I actually think this was a debut novel for her, which is insane. And according to this last page, she has another book that is out that's called The Last Housewife. I personally haven't heard of anyone reading it yet, but I'm going to write it down and look for it because I enjoyed this book so much. I gave this book a 4.5 star, which is probably my highest rating for a mystery thriller that I've given in a really long time. So that is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. And just a note on Metaphors We Live by, I have recently decided that I'm not going to give nonfiction star ratings. I'm just going to say if I recommend it or not. It's really hard to rate nonfiction, at least in my opinion, so I just don't really want to do it anymore, which is why I did not give you a star rating for Metaphors We Live by. So just a little side note. The next one that I have physically is Just Last Night by Vari McFarlane. Again, I read this one in a vlog, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you want to see my full thoughts on this book, then you can go to that vlog. This is a romance book, but it definitely has a different feel from a lot of the other contemporary romance books that I've read. The romance in this book actually didn't start until over halfway through the book, so if you are a romance person and you are looking for a good romance book to read, this is a good one. I did enjoy the romance aspect of this book, but it is not a typical romance. This was very much a slow burn, and I really enjoyed it. The main theme of this book is there is this friend group, and one of the friends in the friend group has died, and so it explores very much in depth the complexities and the stages of grief that you go through when someone close to you has passed away. So I personally really recommend it for that aspect. She does not shy away from the really hard realities of what it's like to go through grief. And I know that's like a really depressing thing to say about a romance book, but I honestly really did enjoy the romance aspects of this book as well as the depiction of grief. I wasn't necessarily going through a completely gut-wrenching time when I read this book, but I think if I had just gone through something that was like really heavy or I was grieving very heavily, then this book would have hit a lot harder. And I gave this book a 4-star. Please pause for just a minute. The angle's probably going to change. I have to plug my camera in real quick. I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Hopefully my camera will not overheat since it is also plugged in, but we will see. The last book that I have physically with me right now that I read in April is Killjoy by Holly Jackson. This is a Good Girl's Guide to Murder novella. It technically comes before A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, so technically it is 0.5 in the series. And this was a really short, really fun, fast-paced, good old time. I really liked this short little novella. I gave it 4 stars. This is about Pip and her friend group before the events of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and Jamie and Connor are hosting a murder mystery party, and it is just the story of that cute little murder mystery party, and it also is the origin story of how Pip came up with the idea for her capstone project. If you did read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, then I would suggest that you tag this one on, even if you've already finished the series. It was just a good time. Now, for the books that I do not have physically with me, the first one that I read was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. Alex Michaelides is the same author who wrote The Silent Patient, which I absolutely loved. I read it last year, and I think this is one of those books where whichever book you read first by Alex Michaelides tends to be your favorite. I personally enjoyed The Silent Patient more than I enjoyed The Maidens, but pretty much everyone who I've seen who has read The Maidens first prefers The Maiden over The Silent Patient. I don't really know what's going on with that, but that seems to be a very consistent trend with his books, which I think is so funny. I gave The Maidens a 3-star. It was definitely not one of my favorite books, and considering I gave The Silent Patient like a 4.5 star, that's a really big difference in my rating, but I just did not have a very good time connecting with the characters, and I actually kind of predicted the ending a little bit, so I was a little bit disappointed to have an inkling towards something in The Maidens. I still highly recommend Alex Michaelides' writing. I just of course would prefer that people read The Silent Patient first because I really enjoyed that one a lot, but that does not mean that this one is not worth a read. It just was not one of my personal favorites. The next one that I read was Heat of the Everflame by Penn Cole. Now this is the 3rd book in the Kindred's Curse saga, and you guys know how much I absolutely adore Spark of the Everflame and Heat of the Everflame. No, and Glow of the Everflame. But for some reason, this book, first of all, it was so much longer than Glow of the Everflame, which is saying a lot because Glow of the Everflame was not a short book. But for some reason, Heat of the Everflame, our main character, annoyed me so much, and there wasn't very much redemption for her. In fact, most of the bad things that happened in the book happened because of her poor decision making, and the fact that our main male character still like trusts her completely is, to me, kind of silly because she's being so obstinate about taking advice, but then she keeps making these unwise decisions and is so easily emotionally manipulated. It was kind of annoying to me, and honestly that was really disappointing to me because Spark and Glow were some of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, and they were really refreshing for me to read because they weren't following very typical romantic-y tropes. But I almost feel like this one backtracked a little bit and did use a lot of typical romantic tropes, which I don't think that the story needed. Now, with that being said, I think that if you had cut some of the fluff, I think the plot line itself is actually a really good, really decent plot line, and I'm definitely going to be reading the last book in the series. Hopefully it will come out this year, but there's still no announcement of release date for that, so I don't necessarily have high hopes that it's coming out this year. I would not be surprised if it ended up coming out next year, but I still really enjoy this series as a whole. It just so happens that this book is one of my least favorite in the series, so that was a little bit disappointing to me, but I would still recommend the series as a whole, at least least read the first one and see if that's something that you're going to be into, and then continue from there. And then the last book that I read in April that I do not physically have with me is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I've talked a little bit about how I enjoyed Mistborn in past videos. That first book was so good. I loved our main characters and I loved the growth of our characters. I love that Sanderson is not afraid to do what it takes in order to make a good story. The magic system in this book was so complex and so confusing, and I absolutely loved it. The concept of it was so cool, and I actually really enjoyed the fact that it took me a majority of the book to remember which metal does what. And now that I've taken a break from the Mistborn series, I'm definitely going to have to go back and relearn what each metal does before continuing on this series so I'm not lost. But I just love a book that has a really complex plot but also a really complex magic system. Like, those are some of the things that really make a fantasy book for me. So with this one having such a complex magic system, I was definitely in. That on top of the fact that I actually really liked a lot of the characters and their development, it made for a really excellent read, at least in my opinion. Moving on to May, we have quite a big chunky book stack here in May because I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 books in May instead of 8, which I think is a very big accomplishment and also a good thing because I did not get to 8 books in June. Anyway, the first book that I read that I have physically with me, again, we're going to go through the ones I have physically with me first. The first one I read was Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I, of course, had to read this right at the beginning when it came out, when everyone was so excited about it, and I am so glad that I did. You guys know that I'm an absolute diehard Hunger Games fan, and this absolutely was the icing on the cake to this series. I love this book. I love Haymitch's story. I love that Suzanne Collins' writing can be so cohesive even after such a long time in between the original trilogy and now these 2 prequels that have come out. Suzanne Collins has such a way of writing characters that you connect with them so deeply. You care about them so much, even though you know that these terrible things are going to happen to them. And I absolutely love when an author can make you care about characters and a story despite what you know is coming. Suzanne Collins is definitely one of the best people in her craft, and I will read anything else that she puts out. Definitely one of my favorite authors. I gave this book 5 stars, and it is the first 5-star in the second quarter of 2025. I, of course, highly recommend it, but of course, do not start with this book. Start with either Ballad or with the original trilogy. I definitely think it's one of the best book series that's probably ever been written, and I think everyone needs to read it. Then I read There by Tommy Orange. I'm not gonna lie, this one definitely disappointed me a little bit, and I don't necessarily think it's even the author's prose that was the problem. I think that Tommy Orange is actually a really good writer, but the format of this book, the style of this book, was the epitome of literary fiction. It was kind of choppy. You were seeing things through lots of different points of view. There wasn't necessarily like one big plot that had details and payoff from beginning to end. It was mostly a book that was based on vibes, and honestly, that's just not my vibe. I found that the ending did not give me anything that was satisfying. In fact, I kind of felt like it abruptly ended and he didn't actually tie things off the way that he should have, even for a good cliffhanger. It was just kind of like weirdly randomly stopped. Yeah, I just did not really enjoy the way that this book was written, the format in which this book was written. So with that being said, I did give this book a 3-star. I'm not 100% sure I would recommend it to people. I just don't think that the pure literary fiction style with mostly vibes, not very much plot, is for me. I love a good plot, and so I probably won't be buying a lot more of those in the future, just reading whatever ones I already have on my shelf. After that, I needed to jump back into fantasy, so I read Apprentice to the Villains by Hannah Nicole Mayer. This is the second book in the Assistant to the Villain series, and I read the first one in the fall and I gave you guys my thoughts on it. I really liked it. It was just a fun, silly, goofy time. Very cliche fantasy things, very just like straightforward romance stuff. It was just kind of really silly. It's like fantasy, but they all work in an office, but they work in the office of the villain, and she is the assistant to the villain in this office setting. And it's just like, for some reason, this quirkiness of like an office, but also pure classic, here's rainbows and unicorns kind of fantasy really worked together in this kind of writing style, because she did not take anything seriously. Anything can be a joke, anything can be ironic, anything can be absolutely ridiculous, and that's the way that she wants it to be. And I thought it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I gave this book a 4-star. I will be continuing to the last book in the series. I think it's called Accomplice to the Villain, but it is not out yet, I don't think. Now we're jumping into some books that I did a reading vlog on, so I'm not going to go super into depth with these, but I read The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This was a surprise to me. I actually liked this book a lot more than I thought that I would. I ended up giving it a 3.75 star, though I would be generous enough to give it a 4-star. And this is just very much a classic contemporary romance kind of book. I just found their relationship to be really endearing because, like I said in my vlog, it's kind of like a Leslie Knope personality dating a Ron Swanson kind of demeanor personality, not necessarily with the same quirks as both of those characters, but with the same demeanor as both of those characters. And so for that reason, it was a lot of fun to read about because they were such polar opposites, but they did a really good job at balancing each other out. But it's not necessarily anything that is going to absolutely blow your mind, like in my opinion, an Emily Henry novel or an Abby Jimenez novel, but it is a really fun romance, and I would recommend if you are a romance lover. Then I read Killer Instinct by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is the second book in the Natural series, and again, I really enjoyed this book. I don't know what it is about young adult mystery series, but the more I read the series, the better I think the books get. I thought The Naturals was okay. I don't even remember what I rated it, but I gave this one a 3.5 star, and I was definitely entertained by it in the moment, but I don't necessarily think about this book or this series often. I love little mystery palette cleansers in between other books to mix up my genres, and so that was perfect for this, and I will be continuing this series and finishing this series, so it's good enough that I want to go on. Then we have my nonfiction book for the month, which is He Speaks in Silence by Diane Comer. This is by John Mott Cober's mother and her experience of going deaf after she was an adult as a young mother. The concept of this book I really enjoyed, and I honestly thought that I was going to enjoy it more because it has deaf representation inside of it. But as someone who does have connection to the deaf community and who does know sign language, I found her experience unnecessarily isolating. And that's really hard to say because this is someone's life story. So I don't want to judge the decisions that she makes because she does not fully flesh out why she made all of the decisions she did make in this book. Again, I don't write nonfiction, so I'm not going to give this one a rating for you guys, but I think the concept of it and the concept of her world had to go quiet in order for her to actually really listen to what the Lord had to say was really interesting. That's all I'm going to say about that one, but I would recommend this book if you're looking for a Christian nonfiction book. And then lastly, one of my favorite books so far of 2025. You guys already know how much I love this book, and it is The Martian by Andy Weir. Again, I love this book. I love anything by Andy Weir, at least everything that I've read so far, which is 2 books I've really loved by him. But this one, I told you guys, was a 4.75 star in my last video. No, this is a 5-star, baby. Like, we have bumped this one up to the 5-star tier because she deserves it. I cannot stop thinking about this book. I cannot stop recommending this book. I cannot stop talking about this book. I love this book. But you guys already know that. If you did not know, this is about a man that gets stranded on Mars in his attempt to survive on Mars until a rescue mission can come and get him. And it is very science heavy, but in a very entertaining way. I love Andy Weir's sense of humor. I love that he makes all of his really smart characters really relatable and really dynamic by giving them a sense of humor at the same time. 5 stars. Please read this book. This is also in my vlog if you want more thoughts on it as well. And now for the books that I do not have physically with me. There was only 2 other books that we have not talked about, and the first one is The Games Gods Play by Abigail Owens. Honestly, I was really disappointed by this book. It is a romantasy, but it is a romantasy between a human and Hades when she is thrust into a Hunger Games type trials situation. I thought that this book was very much meh. The concept of it being about the Greek gods was really interesting, but the actual execution I felt to be a little bit disappointing. I didn't love it. I thought that it was very just classic romantasy, nothing that necessarily stood out, very middle of the road as far as both the writing style and the plot and the characters themselves. There wasn't anything that really gripped gripped me about this book, but it was very entertaining to read. So for that reason, I gave it a 3.25 star. It's not necessarily one I would go out and like recommend to people, but it is on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're gonna read it for free, then it might be worth it if you're actually like really intrigued by the premise of the book, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it over other romanticises. I think there are better ones. Oh, my foot is falling asleep. And then the last one that I do not have with me that I read on Kindle Unlimited, which I don't think is on Kindle Unlimited anymore, is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is a gothic romantasy book, and I thought the setting of this book was really fun, but I didn't necessarily think that the characters themselves were really compelling. This book has a really cool magic system. The magic system in this book it's kind of like playing cards, but instead of thinking like your classic spades, diamonds, clubs, etc., there's different cards that have different magical abilities that people can use when they tap the card, which was really, really cool. But there's only like a couple different kinds of cards, and each card has a different number of cards that are available. So like the most rare card only has 1, and then the least rare card has like 12. So whoever has these cards is considered very fortunate and very wealthy, and they tend to, if they sell them for very, very high prices or exchange them for very, very important things. And so I thought that was really cool as well. And then also our main character, she has this voice in her head that she calls Nightmare, and the Nightmare was by far my favorite character in the duology. I did finish the duology this month, so I'll talk about it in a second, but the Nightmare in the first one was by far my favorite character, and I found all the other characters in the story honestly a little bit two-dimensional. I didn't dislike them as far as flat characters go, but I also wasn't connected with them. I thought all of them were just kind of meh. I read this book specifically for the magic system and for Nightmare, and I really enjoyed it. The premise of the overall series I thought was really cool, so I gave this one a 4.25 star. Now moving on to the last month in this quarterly wrap up, and that is June. Technically it is still June, so there is one book in this stack that is not actually physically in this stack that I am still currently reading, but I have some time to finish it. But the first book that I finished in June was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was one of my 25 books to read in 2025, and I did enjoy it. Now, it wasn't quite as compelling or as amazing as I was kind of hoping that it would be, considering this is some of people's like favorite book ever. Like there's so many people that absolutely adore this Taylor Jenkins Reid's book specifically, but this was also my first Taylor Jenkins Reid's book, and I did really like her prose. I really liked her writing style. I just don't necessarily know if this story was one that was super compelling to me. This is a story about a very famous movie star from the 40s and 50s whose name is Evelyn Hugo, and over the course of her life she has had 7 husbands, and it's kind of been the scandal of her life is all of her marriages, and she's finally ready to come clean and talk about her entire life and all of her marriages, but she wants one specific person to do it and she won't have anyone else do it. And that's the general premise of the book. I still thought the story was good, and I did tear up at a couple points where there were some really unfortunate things that happened. It just wasn't my favorite book ever, and I was really had higher hopes for it. That being said, I did give this book a 4 star, so it's definitely a book that I would recommend to other people. It's just not quite as high as I was expecting it to be when I first started out reading this book. I honestly think now that I've read one book by Taylor Jenkins Reid, I'm going to enjoy her writing style and her prose more because I already know what it's like and I don't have to get used to it anymore. I also read The Midnight Library. I read this book in a day. I was traveling and I read this book from cover to cover on my 2 plane rides that I had on that day. I ended up giving this book a 3 star. Honestly, for a book that so many people have read and so many people say this is kind of a classic, almost rite of passage read when you're first starting to get back into fiction again, I honestly thought it was just meh. I would still recommend that you read it if you are curious about it, partially because it is so short, so it's not going to take up too much of your time, and also because I do think the story is a good one. I just didn't necessarily care for our main character or connect to her circumstance as much as maybe some other people would. This is about our main character Nora, and she has decided that she wants to end her life. When she tried to end her life, she entered into this in-between space called the Midnight Library, where she could try on as many lives as she wanted until she found the life that would fit where she wants to be. And it's the story of her exploring all these different options and these lives and her conclusion at the end of it all. So 3 stars. I thought it was fine. It was a great book to just blow through on a plane, but not one of my favorites of the year. Then on the way back from that trip, I did the same thing with reading this book cover to cover, and this is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This is going to be considered a classic, I think, one day, or is already a modern classic. This also won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and unfortunately, I did not love this book very much either. I gave this one a 2.5 stars. This has the same literary style as There, where it's through multiple POVs and it's mostly vibes but not very much plot. So the plot that you actually get in this book could happen in like 3 chapters. This could be a 20-page book if you went from just the plot, but there's so much fluff and backstory that doesn't always connect to the plot, though some of it does, that you get, and it's through all these random people's POV, but then when you actually get to the end, you're like, oh, I really didn't need all those POVs. I really just wanted the actual timeline of the story. At least for me, that's the way that my brain works. I don't want mostly vibes, no plot. And that was what this one was. And I was just kind of annoyed that I had another book so close to There that was all vibes and no plot. And so for that reason, I gave it a low rating. That being said, Toni Morrison is a very prolific writer, and a lot of people really, really love her writing, and she's considered one of the best writers of this time. But I just don't think that this kind of style of book is for me personally. Then I read Fever 1793 by Laurie Anderson. This is a either middle grade or young adult book, I don't remember which one, about the yellow fever in 1793, obviously. And it follows our main character as she lives in Philadelphia, and she sees the beginning where it's just rumors of the yellow fever all the way through months and months of so many people dying from fever, catching the fever, etc., and all the loss that happens in her life because of the fever, through the end where the fever was finally lifting and it was no longer considered this really big epidemic in the Philadelphia area. For a middle grade book, I thought that this book was absolutely excellent. I gave it 4 stars, and if this book was written in an adult format instead of a young adult format, I probably would have rated it higher because the characters probably would have had a little bit more depth. But considering that it was a young adult / middle grade book and it was this good, I would definitely recommend it. It's a really short book. A lot of the books I read this month were just really, really short. It's less than 300 pages. In fact, it's less than 250 pages. So you could honestly bust this book out in an afternoon if you really wanted to. It was just interesting to read about. I hadn't really learned that much about yellow fever, so learning about it even in a fictional format was interesting to me. Then we have my nonfiction book for the month, which is Forgive by Tim Keller. This is a book about what it looks like to forgive the people in your life who have really wronged you from a Christian perspective. I really enjoyed this book. As you can see, I did put some tabs in it, so he did have some really interesting things to say. Beware that in the beginning it is a little bit more apologetics and theory, and then the practical applications of what it actually looks like, the things that you can do, the steps that you can take are towards the back. I personally love a little bit more of a practical view of a lot of these Christian nonfiction concepts, and so the first half of it was kind of boring or disappointing to me, but once we got into the practical applications of, no, this is what you need to do to forgive, then it got really interesting to me, and I absolutely devoured it and I ate it up. I think that this is a really good book. That is my thoughts on that one. And then the last book that we are going to talk about today, and the only book that I do not have the physical copy of with me for June. Oh no, that's not right. There's 2. So there are 2 more books that I need to talk about. One of them I am still reading, so I'll do that one last. But the other one that I read on my Kindle this month was 2 Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. This is the second and final book in the Shepherd King duology. The first one was One Dark Window, and the second one was 2 Twisted Crowns. I really enjoyed this duology. I thought it was really fun. The gothic setting was a lot of fun, and of course Nightmare was my favorite character, and the concept of playing cards as magic was really interesting to me. I enjoyed the second one more than I enjoyed the first one, mostly because we got to see a lot more of Nightmare in the second one than we did the first one. And so to me, that was really, really interesting. And we also got to see the conclusion of the whole series pretty quickly since it is only a duology, and I really appreciated that as well. I also came to love some of the other characters that I thought were a little two-dimensional in the first one a little bit better in this second one. So with that being said, if you are a romantasy lover and you like interesting magic systems, I would definitely give this one a shot. I ended up giving it a 4.25 star, same as the first one, and overall I just thought that it was a really fun series. And honestly, I really like the fact that it was a duology and not a really drawn out series like a trilogy or even more books than that. I don't necessarily think that this storyline had that depth. The last book that I'm going to be talking about today is the one that I am still reading, which is Iron Gold by Pierce Brown. What do I say about Iron Gold? I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but I liked but did not love the original Red Rising trilogy. With that being said, I really do think that the storyline of Red Rising and Pierce Brown's prose is absolutely phenomenal, and everyone who really enjoys sci-fi should give this series a chance and that they will probably really like it. I just personally did not vibe very well with the main character Darrow, but as you guys can see, I did decide to continue reading the series past the original trilogy because I do think that the story is really compelling. So even though I only rated the books in the 3-star range, I found myself thinking about the story and thinking about the characters long after I finished the books, despite the fact that I didn't necessarily vibe with them super well when I was reading the books. And so for that reason, I decided to continue the series into Iron Gold, and I am actually really liking Iron Gold. It's a little bit more political, a little less action, which I'm actually really enjoying. And one of the main things that I really love about it is that it's multiple POV. We're not stuck in our main character's head anymore. We are getting perspectives from other people who are doing other things in different parts of the solar system all at the same time, and I think that that is really cool. I'm really excited to see how all of their stories come together. I don't necessarily have a solid rating for it yet because I'm not even halfway done with it yet, so I can't necessarily give you what I think my rating will be. If I had to guess, I would think it'd be in a 4-star range, but again, I will let you guys know in some way when I finish it what my rating will be. That was a lot of talking. And that is every book that I read in the second quarter of the year. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. Comment anything down below that you are currently reading or any comments you have about any of the books that I talked about today. That was a lot of talking, so I'm going to go get some water. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time.